The simple argument is that context is content, that the historical and cultural context of the creation of comic books and superheroes and Superman inevitably, unavoidably found its way into the content and into the stories. And it has been noted before, but it has never been investigated in depth. Nobody's ever said, okay, yeah, there's similarities, but what does that mean? Is there more? Where is this taken from? What is the evolution of these ideas? What can we learn from that? Or has anybody looked past 1945 for some reason? And there's a ton, especially during the 60s and 70s, what in comic book parlance is called the Silver Age and the Bronze Age of comics. There is a ton. And nobody has looked at this before, which, when I first discovered that, the first thought came to mind is, how come nobody's written about this? And then the second thought is, I will write about this. And that's sort of my impetus for writing the book, that I felt somebody had to do this. And if nobody else has, I will.
And this, you are specifically referring to, what is this that no one has written? If I ask you to say it in a shortest sentence possible.
Shortest sentence possible. The superhero, the comic book medium, Jewish invention. The superhero genre is a Jewish invention. Yes. The very first superhero, Superman, is a Jewish invention who is also a Jewish character, rich in Jewish symbolism and signification.
Right.
Themes that are rich and consistent. And the very easiest, and also for those who are sort of into comic books, maybe also the most famous example, think of Superman's origin. To save baby Kal-El's life from the doom of the people of Krypton, his father puts him in a small rocket ship and sends him into the unknown. He crash lands in the field in Kansas. He's found by the Kents. They rename him. He grows up, and then he becomes this great savior. That is the story of Moses. Put in a basket, sent down the Nile, right? But there's more. For example, one thing people didn't discuss, if you remember the Christopher Reeve movie from 78, when he turns 18, he hears this calling. And he goes to the North Pole and he crosses the wilderness of the North Pole. There's the Fortress of Solitude, where he sees the hologram of his father, this bright apparition in white. And he says, I am your father, Jor-El. He tells him where he comes from. He bestows upon him the mantle, the responsibility of becoming a great savior, and sends him back into the world. Well, when Moses turns 18, he escapes Egypt. He crosses Midian. He comes across the burning bush. There's a bright apparition who says, I am the God of your father. One is ice, one is fire, but it's the same thematic balance. And he says, you are an Israelite. You're one of the Hebrew slaves. Go back and be a savior. And he goes back and he performs miracles in the name of, it's all there. And
awesome. This is like the entire story of, we refer to all the prophets of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Peace and blessings be upon him, and his family, and his brother Aaron, Harun. I mean, guys, you see for yourself that this one story, which is mentioned in the Torah and mentioned in the Bible as well as the Quran, and how that inspires Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to create this guy.
Right, exactly. And here's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So they didn't sit down and say, oh, let's take Moses and give him a cape and muscles and make him Superman. It's a lot of it subconscious, and a lot of it they just sort of drew. They drew on a lot of their background. One of the things that I use in my book, so Superman was created by two Jewish teenagers from Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They created sort of the prototype version in 1934 when they were 17.
And he was the bad guy.
The original, right? The reign of the Superman. He basically, that version became Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
And they brought a lot of elements. And Jerry Siegel, the writer of the two, Jerry Siegel was the writer, Joe Shuster was the artist. Jerry Siegel wrote a memoir in 1979, and that memoir never got published and got lost. And it only got discovered in 2011. And only one guy before me wrote about it. And it got Larry Ty, who wrote Superman, the High-Flying History of the World's Greatest Hero, which is like a general biography of the character. Doesn't have anything particularly thematic in that sense.
Right.
And the original manuscript that he found is in the Columbia University libraries, and I went there. I scanned the whole thing and I read it. And Jerry Siegel says, here are all the influences that I borrowed from to create Superman.
Okay.
And some of them are Tarzan and John Carter of Mars and Popeye. And
even Popeye.
Yeah, Popeye. He said, I love the idea, and I thought that instead of humor, that could also work as action. Popeye, right? It's all in the book. I detail all these influences, and it's great. And he talks about how the emotional urge to create Superman came from the Nazi persecution of his family in Europe and the rising anti-Semitism in America, which is a very scary time. And he talks, there's quite a few influences. It's a collage. Superman is a collage character. He cobbled it together. And he also talks about Jewish influences. He talks about Samson.
Samson and Goliath, okay.
Right? And he talks about the Golem of Prague, which is a very famous European Jewish legend of basically like a Frankenstein made of mud and given life.
Frankenstein, yes.
And that's also in the book. And he talks about that. And we have Moses, and he just borrowed different elements and put them together. And he wasn't thinking, oh, this is my heritage. He just, I know this story. It's cool. Let's use it. And it all kind of mixed together. And while Superman is, to a large extent, based on Samson and Moses and all that, Clark Kent is based on Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They based Clark Kent on themselves.
Yeah.
Superman was their fantasy. Clark Kent was their reality. They were these shy, nebbishy,
small town kids.
Yeah, they're geeks before there was a term for geeks.
Yeah.
They loved science fiction when the word science fiction was new.